Hello, I'm Sandy Doherty. Welcome to the Vaile Mansion. We're going to have a tour today and see how just wonderful this old building is. Before we go any further, I want to point out to you this cut glass window here is original, and there are 5 of them. You can't see them right now, but you will later. So let's go on in. We are in the gentleman's drawing room. Now today, when you go through this house, if according to the Vailes, it had 31 rooms, but they counted hallways, they counted bathrooms, they counted closets. We don't do that in modern times, but you are going to see 15 of the main, what was considered public rooms. They would have had guests there. And so here in the drawing room, this whole house has been restored as close as possible to 1881. The Vailes had the mansion built. Took about 3 years, but they moved in the fall of 1881. The houses kind of have some tragic history. The Vailes moved in October 81. Mrs. Vaile died 18 months later of a self-administered overdose of laudanum. Now, laudanum is morphine, and it was a legal drug in those days. You could buy it across the counter. Mr. Vaile made his first fortune because he had the mail routes for the Santa Fe Trail. The United States Post Office at that time only delivered as far as St. Louis. Now, Mr. Vaile was not the only man that had mail routes, because you also had the California and the Oregon Trail. He made a great deal of money. So they moved in 81. Early 82, Mr. Vaile, his partners, and other businesses were all indicted for mail fraud, and he had to go to Washington, D.C. and stand trial. Eventually, he was declared innocent, but 2 of his partners were sent to prison. The whole time he's back there, Mrs. Vaile is here in the mansion by herself. Like I said, she overdosed on laudanum on Valentine's Day in 1883. Mr. Vaile came home. He never remarried. He sort of semi-retired, and he never finished the mansion. The Vailes intended on the 3rd floor, they were going to have a ballroom that ran the whole length of the 3rd floor on the north and a billiards room on the south. Well, he never finished that, and it just sat empty. Mr. Vaile died in 1894, and by 1910, this was a nursing home and remained a nursing home for 71 years. After Mr. Vaile's death, there was a big auction. All of his furniture was sold. However, we do have some things original to the house proper. We have 9 marble fireplaces. Each one of these fireplaces is different and unique. They've used 3 different kinds of marble. And interestingly enough, these were coal-burning fireplaces. Now, for 1881, this house was so modern. Mr. Vaile actually had his own gas well on the north side of the house. There was a gas furnace, and they actually had registers on the 1st floor. Now, they didn't have any registers on the 2nd floor because 1881, you needed electricity to pump that hot air up to the 2nd floor. However, they did have 4 different marble fireplaces up there that we will see later. Also, we have 3 original chandeliers. Now remember, these were all gasoliers. There was no electricity when this house was built. And this beautiful chandelier you see here is original, and it's a twin to the one over in the ladies' parlor that we will see later. Now, and we're going to go into the music room. That chandelier also is an original one. Now, of course, they're all electrical now. The nursing home opened in 1910, and by the late 1920s, the City of Independence had a power plant, also had their own water plant. And so the nursing home converted all of the gasoliers to electricity. And so you will see a lot of electric lamps throughout the house. The colors that you're going to see on all the walls are as close as we could match up to the original. The City of Independence inherited this house in 1983. The last owner, and their name was DeWitt, and they never lived in the house. When they bought the house, they were going to restore it, and then he died of a stroke. And she did not want to live in this monstrous house by herself, so she hired a firm, a management firm, and they ran it as a nursing home, continued on. So when Mrs. DeWitt died in 1983, she left the mansion to the City of Independence. And at that time, there were a lot of federal grants available for historical restoration. And that's what did the whole downstairs of the mansion. there are not those grants anymore. And we're just like everybody else. We're applying for extra grants and all that. One of the things that is kind of difficult for the Vaile is it is owned by the City of Independence. And so when you apply to grants, they don't want to give the city money. And so it gets a little convoluted. The next room we're going to go into was the music room. But before I do, I want to tell you, you will notice shutters because we have a lot of windows. There's 156 windows in this house. And these shutters are original. They're made of cypress wood. And cypress wood is almost impervious to wood rot or to water damage. We have most of them put back up, but we still have some up on the 3rd floor in a storage area that we have not installed yet. So let's go on into the music room. We are now in the music room. And of course, we have a lot of musical instruments. The beautiful piano back here. This is a Chickering piano, 1879, and it is playable. In fact, we try to encourage our visitors, if I have anybody, because my piano tuner wants it played every day. Well, we're not open every day, but it is beautiful. And when people do get to play it, oh, they really do love it. Behind me, you'll see the gray Vermont marble fireplace. And remember, these are all original. And what's very interesting, and you might want to get a close-up of it before we leave this room, this has a grapevine design that is carved underneath the top mantle. You're going to see 9 marble fireplaces today. 6 of them will have a motif carved in it that has to do with wine. Now, Mr. Vaile was a very busy businessman because he not only had the mail routes, but he also invested in cattle ranches. And today we have 4.5 acres around our mansion. By the time Mr. Vaile died, he had 1,500 acres. And somewhere to the southwest, not exactly sure where, he actually had his own vineyard. And we have newspaper accounts of where he would serve his own wine to visitors. I have no idea if it was white or red wine, but it was. And you know, it's kind of interesting. Of course, today we have California with Simi Valley and the Napa Valley, all the beautiful wineries that they're known for. But when Mr. Vaile was alive, Missouri was actually the 3rd largest wine producing state in the United States. So that's kind of an interesting fact, like, really? Yeah, it was us. The chandelier is an original chandelier. Now, of course, it has been converted to electricity. But if you get a chance, you'll notice on the arms of the chandelier, there's a little key. And that's because when this was new, you turn that key on in the morning to get the gas, and then they would turn it off at night before they would go to bed. So we're going to go ahead and look at, we have a music box. Now, the Vailes did not have a music box, but that was very, very popular in the Victorian days. And we're going to play a little tune for you because we're very lucky it still works. So we're by the music box. And the thing about music boxes, this is from 1901, and a lot of people get to see them in different places, but here we're going to actually let you listen to one. Strictly acoustical. Don't have to have any talent, you just turn it on. And what we're listening to is a disc made out of steel. And if I don't know if you can see the little holes here, but each hole is a note. It's punched down through here. And as this is turning, it pulls makes the little note there. It lasts 42 seconds, just so you know. And I have no idea what that song is, but it is written on there. As you can see, these are in pretty bad shape, but they still play wonderfully. And we turn it off in the exact right spot or you're in trouble. So also, while we're here, I don't know, you're going to see dresses. I don't want to step out of your way here. All of these dresses have been donated to us. None of them belong to Mrs. Vaile. Most of them are wedding dresses. And of course, this is this beautiful bright red with all this wonderful hand embroidery. People really didn't wear white wedding dresses until after the turn of the century. And so because ladies wanted to wear their dress again. And you didn't have dry cleaners in the 1800s. And so most of the dresses are going to, because they're going to wear it time after time. And a lot of these materials were not hand washable. They were actually sponged off. So as we've been going through the couple of rooms that we've seen so far, I've not touched on this beautiful wood. Something that's very unusual, but it was very usual for rich Victorians. All of the wood in this house, except when we get to the staircase. That staircase is black walnut. You need a hardwood for a staircase. All the rest of this gorgeous wood in this house is actually white pine. It's been hand painted. Here you see it looks like walnut with the burled walnut. And then we're going to go into the dining room here in a second. It is painted to look like a light maple. And this was called faux, which is just a really elegant French way to say fake wood. And it was like an architectural detail, and it was like a fad during the Victorian era. This really had been around since the late 1600s. And so you can see it done particularly in Europe and on the East Coast. But like I said, it was really something the Victorians were into because they considered the idea that they had to have an artist in their house long enough to do the faux bois, and there was a certain cachet to that. And it does take a long time. To do walnut, it's 11 layers of varnish. If you've ever refinished furniture, you know what that means. Now, the lighter woods are not so many layers. There's about 6 layers of paint on the lighter colored woods. Now, when we get upstairs, we have a couple of more different kinds of wood that's been painted, but it's still all white pine. So the next room we're going to go to is the dining room. We're in the dining room now. And of course, I've already told you about how the woodwork is all white pine, but it's been painted to look like a light maple. We have another one of our original fireplaces. It is the gray Vermont marble, a very elegant fireplace, has actually granite pillars. And you will find throughout the house, we have all these wonderful fireplaces, and the pillars are always made out of granite. I can't explain that, but I think it's interesting. Behind me, you can see through to the kitchen. This is a pass-through, was something that was really innovative in Victorian. A lot of times you might have a smaller window, but this one you can see it's quite large. On this side, you actually have shelves with doors, so you can, your favorite things that you want to use occasionally in your dining room. On the other side in the kitchen, and we'll see it later, that's where the everyday things are. There's just plain old shelves over there. One thing about the Vailes and Victorians, in fact, you would never have been in their kitchen. They simply did not do that. Today's, a lot of us, our kitchens are big enough and we intend for people. We like to entertain. It's homey, it's familiar, but not in the Victorian times. There is the beautiful and this is actually hand-painted, watercolored ceiling. Now, when the Vailes built the mansion, of course, I told you about the 31 rooms. 9, in fact, each room that has a fireplace, there's 9 of those, they all had the watercolored murals painted on the ceilings. Down here on the first floor, this is the only one that's left. And because of water damage. And all the years it was a nursing home, they could not, or maybe it was hard to find a painter that could repair the damage. Would have been very expensive. They did not want to spend that kind of money. So then I want you to turn, we have a display case here. And this is something that's new to us. I don't know if you're familiar, but for many, many years, Independence had a hair museum on Nolan Road. The lady died. Her immediate relatives did not want to be bothered, but her granddaughter is determined that every piece made out of human hair is going to find an appropriate home. And hair weaving and hair items were very popular with the Victorians, and particularly, and here's the thing that kind of surprises us. First of all, in Victorian times, everybody had long hair. All of the ladies did. And people saved their hair. Today, if we have long hair, and a lot of the younger people particularly, when you clean your brush and your comb, you put it in the trash. They saved it. They had special little containers to save the hair. And then they would make pictures or even jewelry. It was very popular to make jewelry out of Grandma's hair. And every year on her anniversary that she died, they would be sure to wear that jewelry. It was always black. Always black. That was very important to the Victorians. And so we have a larger, when we get into the little sitting room, we have a very large picture. It looks like, the circle, the beautiful, and it's all made out of hair. In this display case, actually we have small pictures and we have a lot of jewelry. And so when the hair museum closed down, the granddaughter called me and said, Come and pick out anything you want. And so I didn't want to, you know, we are set up as a home. We have beautiful antiques. Of course, and, you know, none of the furniture belonged to the Vailes because everything was sold after Mr. Vaile's death. But it was very, very, very popular in Victorian times. So by having this display, that's just one more Victoriana that we can show to people. We're standing in the Vailes upstairs kitchen. When the Vailes lived here, there were two kitchens. This was what I call the preparation kitchen. They would have a lot of names for it. The still room, the keeping room, but their cooking kitchen was in the basement. Now you can see behind me and to my right over here, you can see this is this is a stairway that goes up. This is the servants' stairway. And all these really rich, big Victorian houses, the front staircase was for company and for the people that live here. This is for the servants. And of course, this is really funny when I have little kids, 8 and 9, come through the house. Until you were a teenager, even if you were, you know, you belonged to the family, children also used the rear staircase. They did not go up the front one, unless it was Christmas or their birthday. Then that was a treat for them. They got to go up the main staircase. But underneath, there's also, you can't see it, but it's around the corner is the staircase that goes to the basement. So the food would all be prepared here, cut up, whatever, get all the bread made, the rolls made and everything, but it would go downstairs to be cooked. And that's because this is a wooden floor. And so 1881, you either used wood or you used coal. And if you're cooking, you might get a spark on the floor and that would cause fires. So downstairs, and it's really interesting, people are always surprised. We do not take guests to the basement because, well, first of all, it's a storage area for the city. The City of Independence owns the house, and we have so much stuff down there, barriers and cones and stuff like that. So, but the floors actually are cement, and they've been poured at different times, however. So you go from room to room, you might step down or you might have to step up. So we don't take people down there because it can be hazardous. But originally, that's where the cooking kitchen was. And then in the back of the house, now we're not going to go into the back of the house. That was strictly the servants' area. But originally, now you can see we have 14-foot ceilings down here. When we got upstairs on the second floor, we have 12-foot ceilings. We're not going to go to the third floor because it was never finished. It has 11-foot ceilings. But through that doorway over there, you go into the back of the house. Now, Mr. Vaile, when we get upstairs, you're going to see he actually had bathrooms upstairs with flush toilets, copper bathtubs with hot and cold water. He supplied his own water supply. You did not have a city water supply in 1881. One thing about independence, and this is something that people get into because of all the trails, the Oregon Trail and the California and the Santa Fe Trail, all left from Independence. The main reason was Independence is covered with freshwater springs, lots of water that makes it cheap, and it was good water. And once you started out across the Kansas prairie, you might not find good, clean water till heavens knows where you would do that. Well, Mr. Vaile, outside just west of our house, there is a spring. And so he used that spring for his water supply for his bathrooms upstairs. But you know, water towers are not very pretty, and this house is gorgeous. It's completely, you know, made of brick. It's just quintessential Victorian. But water tower is pretty ugly. So he built a tower room, and it was 31 foot tall, 12 foot in diameter. And from the outside, it looks just like a tower you would see on a chateau or on a castle. Because he didn't want you driving up to the mansion. Now, when this house was built, it cost $150,000. Today, that would cost you close to $7 million to build this house. So, you know, he spent all that money. People drive up to your house and you look at it ugly. There's no way to fancy up a water tank. But so he built that tower room to hide the water tank. So by the time this became a nursing home and the City of Independence finally, sometime in the 1920s, Independence got its own water supply and got its own power plant. And so the nursing home switched to electricity instead of gasoliers. And they also had city water. And they took that 31-foot tall tower room, made 2 rooms. Upstairs was a break room for the nurses. Downstairs, they put a bathroom. Now, that means all the old people have to come wandering through this kitchen to get to the bathroom. But until that time, the nursing home opened in 1910, until sometime in the early 1930s, the only bathtubs in this house were on the second floor. They did not have a bathtub down here. Now, when the city first inherited this house and we started giving tours in 1984, and so we had people that had worked here and they wanted, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Like, because they didn't know the history. This was just a big old nursing home to them. But a lot of them had worked here for a long, long time. So they picked our brains, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Well, we picked their brains. And it's like, how did you get people up and down 14 foot of stairs to take a bath? And this one gal told me, she said, honey, they didn't go upstairs. If they were not, so what they did was, that tells you for like from 1910 till sometime in the early 30s, people just got a sponge bath if they were on the first floor, because they really couldn't go up and down. Only people that were actually mobile had rooms upstairs. Otherwise, they had beds down here. And of course, and it sounds really depressing to us nowadays, but when the nursing home first opened in 1910, they actually had patients in the basement. And in fact, all of the doors down there and the rooms downstairs are pretty much even with the rooms that you see up here. And we still have all the numbers over the doorways. We have 8 rooms downstairs, and which I always get a kick out of that. But of course, by the 1940s and the 1950s, people weren't going to have a room, and they just didn't want a room in the basement. But when this first opened in 1910, people lived, you just were starting to get a really middle class. And so people did stay in the basement. And I have read, there have been articles of, like, they would interview somebody because he had his 100th birthday. And he had a room in the basement. And they said something about his room. And he said, I've never lived in a house with 14-foot ceilings and 9 marble fireplaces and all this beautiful woodwork. Even though he lived in the basement, he still lived in a house that had all of that. And he was happy with it. But by the 1950s and the 60s, people had higher expectations. And so they quit using rooms in the basement. But we still have the numbers over the doors. So now we're in what I call the cardinal room. It's really dark red. Kids get a big kick out of it when I like say, why do I call this the cardinal room? And we started doing that. The Vailes got married in 1861, same year that the Civil War started, and they moved to Missouri. And when they first moved to Missouri, they lived in the Westport area of Kansas City. They lived there about, we're not really sure, 11 to 14 years. But their neighbor was the Mr. Robert Van Horn. Now, the name Van Horn's people know about in Independence because there's a high school. The family that gave that land to the Board of Education is the same Van Horn family that Mr. Vaile lived next to. And they became quite friendly. Mr. Van Horn also was the mayor of Kansas City for a couple of years, a couple of terms, and he owned a Kansas City newspaper, which is what, it was lucky for us. So when his friend, the Vailes, built this beautiful mansion, he had a big article in his newspaper. It was called the Kansas City Journal-Post, and it was a double-page article. There's like 18 columns, and just the whole history of the house. And he's the one that notified us in the article, talks about the 9 marble fireplaces, the 14-foot ceilings. Mr. Vaile had his own gas well. He had his own water supply. And we relied on that for a lot of our information. When you don't have children that pass down your information, a lot of things can get lost. So here actually this was a sitting room. The next room we're going to see is the ladies' parlor, which is the largest room in the house. Downstairs, the house is actually set up for the public. They intended to entertain. So you'll notice there's a lot of chairs in these rooms, but they had a lot of visitors. Well, if Mrs. Vaile had 2 ladies come to call, she really wouldn't want to use the largest room in the house and yell at each other. So they would use the little sitting room. And this is the first time that we have seen the white Carrara marble fireplace. We're going to see it a few more times throughout the house. And it's quite lovely, has a beautiful decoration here on the front. Nothing to do with wine. Now when we get into the ladies' parlor, you're going to see a fireplace has 3 different motifs to do with wine. So we're going to go ahead and go into the ladies' parlor. And later on, I want to point out to you that we do have a hair wreath, very large hair wreath. These were very popular in Victorian times. Okay, now we're in the ladies' parlor, the largest room in the house. And this is our most expensive fireplace. It is basically the white Italian Carrara marble fireplace. The panel you see across the front and the pillars on either side are actually made out of pink onyx. The newspaper account of the house said that when the fireplace is stoked and full of coal, these were coal burning fireplaces, that you would see a pink glow from behind the onyx here. This fireplace has 3 different motifs of wine. Now remember, Mr. Vaile was really into wine. On either side of either corner, there's a little square up here and it's carved. There are 2 hands. Each hand is holding a champagne glass and they're toasting each other. And you can see the bubble between the rims of the glass. Also at the foot of those beautiful pink onyx columns, there are very natural looking grape leaves that are carved into the marble. I always like to show those first because you have other up here. These are very regimented, but these are your grape leaves going across. So this is it is the most expensive and it is the most decorative fireplace in the house. And also in the ladies' parlor here, we have the matching chandelier. This is an original chandelier. And I just like to mention the curtains. We had those redone a few years ago. The Vailes moved in 1881, and what was very popular in the early 1880s for windows at rich houses were something like you can see in the window that we just saw in the red room. They had the lace panels that went from top to bottom, and they would have a beautiful lambrequin, which we would call a valance, but they called it a lambrequin. Well, by the 1890s, the heavy draperies had come back into style. So when we had to have new curtains in here or new drapes, these are about 3 years old. The drapes themselves have a paisley design. That was a really big deal in Victorian times. We don't think anything about it. The paisley design actually goes back to the Persian, the 6th century. And of course, once particularly the people from Europe, not Europe, England, they brought back everything from the East that was very, very exotic. And so they're the first ones that brought back the designs with the paisley. But some I don't know who it was, but there is a little town in Scotland called Paisley, Scotland, and they figured out how to make a loom to copy the paisley design, and then it dropped in price. So up until that time, mostly royalty had materials that had the paisley design. But once they figured out how to do that loom, then it was still upper middle class, but it was quite a deal. We don't think anything about it now because we've got all these wonderful materials that we do. So in just a little bit, we're gonna go upstairs. Oh, almost forgot, I wanted to talk about the little my grandmother had one of these and it was called a gossip bench, but in Victorian times, this was a courting bench. Now in the Victorian era, young single fellas and young single girls had to sit in separate chairs. They were never allowed to sit next to each other like on a divan or a little sofa. So leave it to the French, and they invented the courting bench. Now, of course, in France, this is called a tête-à-tête, which just means head-to-head. But English-speaking countries called it a courting bench. Times changed, and later on in the 19th century, it was actually called a conversation bench. And the Vailes actually had one. We have an inventory of the house. None of our furniture is original. But after Mr. Vaile died, and they had the great big sale, a big auction in 1901, and probate court came in and did an inventory of the whole house, and we have a copy. It's pretty messy and it's hard to read. But in this room is listed a pink velvet conversation bench. So we decided we needed one of those, and it took a long time. We opened to the public in 1984. We did not find this until the 1990s, and then we had to have it recovered. So it didn't belong to the Vailes, but they had one in this room. So we're going to go upstairs. We're going to go upstairs now. Now the upstairs that's really where the Vailes lived. Downstairs, all these beautiful rooms that I've been showing you with these gorgeous fireplaces. This is where they entertained. Upstairs is where they live. Now, it's still beautiful. It's going to be a little bit more simple. I'll try to point that out. Like down here, we have 14-foot ceilings. On the second floor, we're going to have 12-foot ceilings. But I really want to talk about this staircase. Now, the other wood that you've seen throughout the house is painted pine, the faux bois. The staircase is the real deal. This is black walnut. And there's a very bottom reason for that. You need hardwood on a staircase. White pine is not. It is a very soft wood. I had a carpenter tell me that if this had been pine, they would have had to replace it, considering that the house, was open in 1881. It would have been replaced, particularly when it became a nursing home, probably every 20 years, because pine's a soft wood. So anyway, this is all black walnut, and you'll see the adjoining pillar over there as we go upstairs. The thing about the fireplace staircase, it's a little dark. There was not electricity until the nursing home had it installed after City of Independence got its power plant. And they did everything as cheaply as they could. They did not bother to put a light in the staircase, so it's somewhat dark. At Christmas time, we alleviate that. We'll have lights going up and down the side of the staircase, so that does help a little bit. So we've already talked about the front door. We'll see that when I take the groups upstairs, when we come downstairs, it's really pretty, particularly if it's still the sun is in the east and it's shining through those windows. So let's go on upstairs. We're now on the second floor. Now the second floor is where the Vailes lived. Would have been entertained downstairs. And this is really fancy up here, but it's a little bit of cut because this was just for their private living. Now up here, we're still lucky because we have 5 of the watercolored ceilings. Downstairs, when it was the nursing home, they just could not afford to hire a painter. Probably would have a hard time finding someone that could do the watercolored designs on the ceiling. Now up here, of course, you're in the center hallway. Now if you look behind me and along the walls, this looks like a living room. And in fact, it was their living room. They didn't entertain up here, but this is where you see the divan and the chairs and the side tables to read or whatever. The wood up here in the hallway is painted to look like beech wood. And you'll also notice we have transom windows. Now, when we go into these are rooms that people are going to need privacy. They're bedrooms. We're going to see Mr. Vaile's library. And so you can shut your bedroom doors, adjust the transom windows with other windows that you've got open in the room. And that's how people tried to cool off their house. And it's kind of really interesting. You can't see it always, but all of the glass in the transom windows is the original glass, and it's really wavy. But it's so high that you really can't see it that well. Now, the first room that we're going to go into is what I call the cherub room. You're going to see it has a beautiful watercolored murals and has 3 little angels painted in the ceiling. Also, before we do that, I just want to show you behind, we have these huge display cases of this beautiful French antique clothing. And this is probably about the time from the French Revolution in the very late 1700s. People are really fascinated with this clothing, and they're gorgeous. And this beautiful pink, what would you call it? Well, it's a coat. Actually, it's an opera coat. It's a gentleman's opera coat. And that's always kind of like, it looks really feminine. But something that some people don't know, all fashion came from France. Clothing, the window treatments, the furniture. And in one time in France, girls wore blue, boys wore pink. That seems really strange to us, but that was for about 200 years until after the French Revolution. So let's go into, actually was the Vaile's sitting room originally, but now it's decorated as a bedroom. So now we are on the second floor, and originally when the Vailes lived here, this was their sitting room. It has been redone as a bedroom. When the last owner, Mrs. DeWitt, the lady that so kindly gave the house to the City of Independence, she was also a very active member of the DAR. And so when the city started doing all the restoration, the DAR gave us the bed, the little settee, and that actually is a sewing machine. Everybody today, I think, is all aware of the old Singer sewing machines. That's a Florence sewing machine. Now remember I told you the upstairs, of course, this is 12-foot ceilings. Downstairs we had 14-foot. And this is another beautiful watercolored mural. I usually refer to this room as the cherub room because over in the bay window, you'll see the little design there with the 3 little angels and or cherubs, whatever you have. And so we show it as the bedroom, but I always like to make sure people know it was a sitting room. The fireplace up here is gray Vermont marble, and it has a grapevine design a little bit different than any of the ones you saw downstairs. It goes all the way underneath the mantle. Now, this house, when it was built, most Victorian homes do not have closets. And it is true in parts of the United States, you paid a tax on how many doors you had in your house. And so poorer people weren't going to, and they didn't have very many clothes anyway. Well, the Vailes had a lot of clothes. But what I find interesting is that there are 6 main rooms on this second floor. Each room has a closet. Even you're going to see the main servant's bedroom in the very back of the house, and they had a closet. The closets in the other rooms that the Vailes would avail themselves of, now at the time, hangers were not invented until 1903. They hung their clothes on hooks. We still have the hooks in the closet. And so out of the 6 closets, 5 of them have hooks. And then the closet that is in the servant's bedroom, they had shelves in their closet. They did not have anywhere to hang their clothes. They probably only had 2 sets of clothes. And their closet has shelves. Well, they were the servants, and they had to keep track of the sheets and the blankets and the towels and the soap for the bathrooms upstairs. So I find that kind of interesting. Of course, this painted ceiling, we're very lucky up here because we didn't have a lot of the water damage. Now we're going to see Mr. Vaile's library in a little bit, and it had damage from water on the roof that leaked. Up here, now we're not going to look at it real good, but up here we're still walking on the pine floors. When the Vailes had this mansion, they actually, and it seems so strange to us, they had wall-to-wall carpeting. It was wool carpeting. It was made by a company out of England, and it was made in 18-inch strips. So you would lay the strips, they would be sewn together. If something damaged, they could just take out the material and put a new piece of carpeting there. All the years it was a nursing home, they covered the whole house with linoleum. So when the city inherited the house, they took up the linoleum. And so, in fact, all of the floors have been sanded twice. They cannot be sanded again. And they are pine, soft wood. And so if you actually get to go through the house, you'll notice when you're walking up here, almost all of the doorways, you can see they've had replacement pieces of wood. And you'll notice some of the other floors very splintered because pine is a soft wood. It didn't matter to the Vailes because they had covered it with carpeting. So the next room that we're going to go into is actually the Vailes' bedroom. They did share a bedroom. That was a little unusual. And I've often found it very amusing, the newspaper article about the Vailes that was written by their good friend when they had lived in Westport, Mr. Van Horn. I can't remember exactly the wording about it, but it was quite blunt that they shared a bedroom because it was unusual for wealthy people. Most of the time they'd have their own suites. So, and in the bedrooms in here, all of the wood is painted to look like bird's eye maple. That was a very popular wood in the Victorian days. You can't even buy bird's eye maple today. It must have been a very slow growing, but it isn't grown. So anyway, we'll go into the Vailes' bedroom. Okay, we're in Mr. and Mrs. Vailes' bedroom. They did share a bedroom. The fireplace in here is the white Carrara marble. It has the same grapevine design across the front of it underneath the mantle that we saw on the gray marble in their sitting room. So, and that's the first time in this whole house that you've ever seen anything done twice. Downstairs, everything was very unique, very decorative. Up here, they could be a little bit looser with the design. Remember, this is where they lived. They didn't entertain up here. This is the largest room on the second floor. It has the beautiful watercolor murals painted. You can see on the west and the east, you have a little bit of a oriental motif, but it's the lady over in the bay window, the lady that is laying in her bed and her somewhat disarray. She has on her a nightgown, and you'll notice her bosom is quite exposed. And now The veils, today it's kind of hard to think about. The veils were never accepted socially here in Independence. The main reason being, Mr. Vaile was a very strong Lincoln Republican. And he supported, the president, but he was also very much against slavery. Now, Independence and Missouri fought on the side of the North in the Civil War. However, middle part of Missouri was always very sympathetic to the South. And a lot of the people in Independence, they believed in slave rights, that you should be able to have slaves. Most of the people around here couldn't afford them, but they were from Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee. They had moved to Missouri, and they believed that was okay. They weren't happy with Mr. Vaile. However, Mr. Vaile, because he had the contracts for the Santa Fe Trail mail route, he employed 1,100 people. And a lot of people vote their pocketbook. But they did not have to accept the Vailes socially. And of course, the Vailes moved in late 1881, and then he got indicted. Well, that caused a lot of scandal. And so Mrs. Vaile was pretty much alone in this mansion. She had a lot of family in New York, and she had a lot of friends in Westport. Now today, you can hop in your car and you can be in Westport in 20 minutes. But in those days, if her friends wanted to come and visit her, it'd be in a horse and buggy. And you would go south, like if you left here and you were going to Westport, you had to go south almost to 23rd Street today, take Westport Road, which was a curvy wagon road originally, to go to Westport. Probably take you about 3 hours or more. So you're not going to just drop in and visit someone if it takes you 3 hours to get there and 3 hours to get home. So she was pretty much isolated. Yes, she had 9 servants, but they were servants. Now the story goes, and after her death, there was, of course, an overdose of laudanum. Now laudanum was opium, but it was a legal drug in those days. And people did administer to themselves. In fact, and I find this really funny, but of course I had 4 kids, but they would actually give laudanum to children because they kept them quiet during church. And that was, and so, that's a new take on things. And so, of course, once she overdosed, there was a lot of gossip about that. And so Mr. Vaile, of course, had been indicted, found innocent. And when he returned home, he pretty much semi-retired. He never remarried. He never finished the 3rd floor of the house. They intended to put a ballroom on the whole north side and the billiards room on the south. It stayed empty until the nursing home remodeled it in the 1930s. And even today, since it was never finished by the Vailes, we have not finished it either. And it's kind of a mess up there, but we use it for storage also. Now, the lady that is painted, now all of these ceilings are watercolor, and the lady that is up there, like I said, she's in her nightgown. Well, the gossip got around that it was a naked woman, and no lady would ever allow anything like that. She's not naked, she never was, but she just had a very daring décolleté there. And so that was just one more thing that Mrs. Vaile had to worry about. The Vaile's fireplace in here, of course, we've already talked about that. Now remember, upstairs, Mr. Vaile had that gas furnace in the basement, but it did not heat the upstairs. They strictly relied on the fireplaces. Now, if you ever get to come over against that wall, Mr. Vaile had the 2 bathrooms with flush toilets, copper bathtubs. He had sinks in the rooms. And it's now I've heard that really expensive houses, even nowadays, are starting to go back to that. They'll put a sink in the bedroom too. It's very handy. And something that you need to remember, for centuries, what did humans do? They had a pitcher and a bowl of water, and they would wash their hands and face at night, and they would wash that again in the morning. And so it was very, it made a lot of sense for him to put the sinks in the bedrooms, because that's what people were used to doing. But the nursing home did not do that. Now the woodwork, again, in here, like in all of these rooms, is actually the other kind of wood. It's not the heavy walnut. And if you notice how much lighter the wood is up here. And of course, the paint, the green, the dark green, and all these colors, all of this paint is as close as we could match up to the original colors. They had experts come in, they were up on ladders, and they were scratching away paint and many, many layers, because what was very popular, the nursing home actually, I think I counted in one room downstairs the hallway, 11 layers of wallpaper. So that's how they redecorated. So we're going to go on out into the hallway. Now on this floor, we have 6 rooms. Each room has a closet. But we also have another little room at the end of the hall that it was actually like a little smoking room. And we often say that, you know, so when I tell people that we have 6 rooms, I mean the big rooms. I don't count the little small one. The interesting thing about the small one, we'll be going in there in a little bit, is when they painted the woodwork, they painted faces into the woodwork. And so Mr. Vaile liked to take people in, and they'd have like a couple of glasses of whiskey or wine. And he liked to see just how long before they thought they were seeing things. So that'll be the next room we'll go look at. Okay, now we are in, now this room was referred to as the nature's bower. It has stars painted on the ceiling, original design. When the Vailes lived here, they had a green rug on the floor. And this is as close as we could come to it. In the woodwork in this room, there are actually over 300 faces. Most of them are quite small, and they're very hard to see unless you have a real strong flashlight. The sun coming in actually fades them out. This room was called, like I said, Nature's Bower. And the story was that Mr. Vaile would bring his partners or maybe passing politicians. They would come up here, have a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey. And Mr. Vaile, he didn't say anything about the faces that are painted into the woodwork. He liked to see before they thought they were seeing things. And if you look on the entryway here, there's very large faces. All of this wood is still white pine. So not only has it been painted different kinds of wood, the artist just had himself a little bit of fun and did the faces. Now, I have never heard of this done anywhere in the United States. And we've had a lot of people come through here. I've been doing touring now for 40 years. However, this is very popular in England. And they have many homes that are advertised, a room with the grotesque, because that's what they call the faces. And some of them are really grotesque. They do look humanoid, but some of them are animals and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of fun. And I know personally, there's 3 different Victorian homes in London that advertise, and you can go through. They each have a room with the grotesques. So, and of course, on the ceiling, we have the stars, which is so pretty. And so we are getting ready to go into Mr. Vaile's library, and that's the end of this room. So here in Mr. Vaile's library, I just want to point out to you, he actually had the desk. You'll see the 2 bookcases on either end. This is the original bookcases. And if you look real close, you notice that it has the cabinets along the bottom. You can open up one of the doors and pull out a writing board. And so he has like the built-in desk. And also I want to touch on the picture of Lincoln, because Mr. Vaile, that was his idol, was Abraham Lincoln. And of course, that was just one more reason that the politicians here in Independence did not particularly get along with Mr. Vaile, because most of them were the Democrats and they were for the South. So the next room we're going to go into is the guest bedroom. And it has the white Carrara marble fireplace that we're going to look at. By the way, the fireplace in here in the gentleman in his library is just like what was downstairs in the gentleman's parlor. It is the red marble. And that, I have a lot of people say, where's that from? Well, actually, red marble at one time was actually mined in southern Missouri, but also in Georgia. So it's an American marble, wherever it came from. So now we're in the guest bedroom. And of all the rooms upstairs, this is the one that does not have any of the original watercolored mural. And you know it probably was the first one done since it's the guest bedroom. However, we think what happened is, you know, I told you that the nursing home by the 1930s put a mental institution on the 3rd floor, divided up all the rooms and made it very secure. Also up there is a bathroom, and it's about 1/5 the size of this room. And so we think probably what happened is they probably had a water leak. And of course, the nursing home never did want to pay the money to have something repainted. In this bedroom, they have the white Italian Carrara marble fireplace. It also has the grapevine design underneath the mantle. So there, once again, you see the great motif being pulled throughout the house. We have an armoire over here that has a display of underclothing, ladies' underclothing. And the reason, now the Vailes would not have had an armoire because they have a closet in this room. But we found the armoire up on the 3rd floor. when it was all being cleaned out after the nursing home. And it's really easy to display things. People can see it much easier without having to try to go into a closet. And I've pulled out a couple of pieces because I think these are given to us. They did not belong to the Vailes. But this is a lady's chemise, okay? Now, girls, they did not make elastic until after the turn of the century. So there was not elastic until like 1910 and so forth. So this is the lady's basically undergarment. And girls, this is how she went to the bathroom. Can you see? This is your chemise. And so it's like, oh my gosh. I always like to laugh and say, Victoria's Secret has nothing on us. Also, gentlemen wore nightshirts. And it's so funny. I get kids in here and I say, does your dad have one of these? No, and I don't think he'd like it. I had this one, but this is a man's nightshirt. And so we've got those hanging. And people can come in and look at those and take them down and get a better look at them. Now we're going to go through what we call this the guest bathroom. When we were over in the Vailes sitting room, we were adjacent to what we called the Vailes bathroom. The bathrooms had running water. They had hot and cold water, had flush toilets. Of course, Mr. Vaile had all of his own bathroom and plumbing, and I would love to know just where everything was at that time. Of course, nobody remembers. It was never written down. So we're going to cut through there, and we'll just take a look at I like to show the copper bathtub, because he did have copper bathtubs. We are in the guest bathroom. Now remember, there were two bathrooms up here on the second floor, extremely unknown in the middle of the United States in 1881. However, wealthy people over in New York did have indoor bathrooms with working toilets and bathtubs. And I often find I like to ask my people, you know who invented the flush toilet? And people look at me like, I said, yeah, you do know. His name was Thomas Crapper. And he is the one that invented the flush toilet. And he had a warrant to the Queen. He was English. He was based in London, and he actually had the warrant to the Queen. And so in here particularly, I want to show you the copper bathtub. Now, people did have copper bathtubs, but it was very, very unusual. We've had our bathrooms redone. Now, we've been open since 1984. The bathrooms were redone just about the turn of the century, and they were actually paid for by private citizens that just loved the Vaile. And so our copper bathtub is a close proximity, but it's not an antique. When we were doing these bathrooms, we found one copper bathtub in Omaha. They wanted $6,000. Today, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot in 1998. And so anyway, we love to show this to people because we do have the copper bathtub and we have the flush toilet. Now, this is the guest bathroom. The Vailes had their own bathroom off of that first sitting room that we saw. Also, if you get a chance to come in here, I want you to look at the lambrequin. Now, you will see that a lot of times when they're talking about decorations for Victorian. You would call it a valance. But they were really extremely, very, very fancy and very expensive, and they're called a lambrequin. And we have one hanging in the window here, and we have another one over at the doorway in the Vailes bathroom. What I want to show you is a very unusual piece of an antique. This is a petticoat console. It has the mirrors on the top, which is not all that unusual, but we have the mirrors on the bottom. These would always be in the hallway close to the front entrance. And the lady of the house would check to make sure her petticoats were not showing. You did not leave the house if you had a petticoat showing. And so we're very lucky to have this piece. Also here in this main hallway, we have pictures of the three private owners. The portraits of Mrs. Vaile and Mr. Vaile are from old photographs. The one that we have of Mrs. Vaile, she's actually in her wedding dress. Her wedding photo was taken by a very famous war photographer, but he also had studios in Washington, D.C. and in New York City. Mr. Vaile's photograph, he's 63. Now, when the Vailes were married, they were married 1861. She was 27, pretty much considered on the shelf, but she came from a very wealthy family. Most people were actually considered an absolute spinster by the time you were 27 and not married. Mr. Vaile was only 31, but we could not find a good picture of him, an authenticated picture, till he's 63. So I always tell people that old geezer did not marry this sweet young thing. They were much closer to the same age. Underneath the staircase is a picture of Carrie Mae Carroll. She is the lady that ran the nursing home for 41 years. She was also the second female lawyer in the state of Missouri. Another interesting fact about her is when she was a child, her father was friends with Mr. Vaile. Now, Mr. Vaile owned 1,500 acres by the time he died, but Liberty Street out here just on the east side of the house was always the eastern border. And Carrie Mae Carroll, her family lived in a small house over there. And she could remember visiting the Vaile mansion, and she could remember telling people how Mr. Vaile would tell her father he was the wealthy man because he had children. And of course, the Vailes never had any. The last pictures I want you to take a look at are of the DeWitts. They are the third final private owner. And Mrs. DeWitt is the lady that gave the house to the city when she died in 1983. The DeWitts were very wealthy. They had no children. No children ever lived in this house. Mr. DeWitt owned car dealerships in New York and Independence. Mrs. DeWitt, now he died at a very young age. They had bought the house. They were having it restored. He died of a stroke. She did not want to live in this 31-room house by herself. And so she hired a management firm, and they continued to run it as a nursing home until 1981. Finally, in 1981, the state of Missouri passed laws that concerned themselves with nursing homes. There were no laws about nursing homes before 1981. So when Mrs. DeWitt died in 1983, she is the one that gave the house to the city of Independence. She was very active. She loved history. She was president a couple different times of the Jackson County Historical Society. She belonged to the DAR. She was very interested in anything to do with history. So we're very lucky that she was, because the thing about it is when they bought the house, Carrie Mae Carroll, the lawyer that ran it for so long, when she died in 49, the house went on the market. There were actually builders that were bidding on it with the intent to bulldoze the house and put garden apartments here. And Mrs. DeWitt stepped in and bought the house. She paid about $61,000. Now, that doesn't sound like a great deal, but in the early 1960s, that was a lot more money than what it sounds like today. So we can really thank Mrs. DeWitt, because she is the one that saved the house. So that's the end of it. I want to thank you guys for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and come and visit us sometime. When you really get to see all the little details, it's very, very interesting. Thank you.